Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the Aether Winds this episode are...
I'm Davy, and not a lot of people know this, but Warren Zevon actually sang about the Kharadron Overlords a long time ago. Lawyers, guns, and money would get me out of this.
I'm Paul, and I don't know about you, but I think this Battletome is shipshape.
I'm Aaron, and if I've learned anything about this book, it's that those who are can do, and those who are cannot work the docks.
Nice. This is Eric, and when it comes to frigates or ironclads, I'd take Aether Ore. In this episode, we cover the lore of the Kharadron Overlord Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of wheelin and dealin, keelin and cold-steelin, and then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those steampunk duardin. How are you tonight, landlubbers?
Yeah, that's us. Yeah, keelin because on the ships they've got the keel. You guys get it, right?
Yeah,
it's a funny joke.
The underbelly of the ship.
You know what? I was doing good. I'm doing much better now, actually.
Nice. I haven't been here for a couple of months. Even though we were going to try and pretend like I had.
We hadn't noticed.
And that's how you're going to come back, huh?
That is how I'm coming. That's how you know I'm here.
Yeah.
Coming in hot.
But yeah, so Aaron.
Yeah.
How you been?
Hanging in there just fine. I'd love to tell you interesting and compelling stories about things that I've been up to, but I am without. I am sans that. I'm still just working on terrain, which I feel like is all I've ever been talking about lately. But beyond that, honestly, I'm sort of in a low-key position these days. No deadlines, not that I ever have deadlines, but it's fun watching everybody else sort of scurry around and have to get stuff done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Davey, how's your scurrying?
It's going pretty well. Getting ready for a annual game cabin getaway. That's happening next weekend. Looking forward to that.
Sure. You never sent me the address for that, actually.
That's true. Yep. That's the first game.
Well,
you can find it. We have a lot of betrayal games on tap. So like,
it's already started.
Is he going to want to turn into one of those comedy horror movies where everybody starts actually stabbing each other in the back?
Remains to be seen.
Okay.
But other than that, been doing a lot of Underworld stuff. There's a lot of exciting things happening there. And I've been engineering a deck with friend of the show, Jeff Osborne, that I think is a legit contender. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Could have been somebody.
I'm hearing the Rocky theme in my head right now.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a training montage. We'll see, because Adepticon is coming up. So excited about that.
I hope the whole training montage is just you doing card tricks, like the different dealer, like...
Oh, yeah. So I make sure you get the perfect hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want 5 minutes of you running upstairs.
Actually, no, I don't want you
just keep
cheating.
going.
I just want you looking cool while you do it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
And then that's your secret. You always look cool when you're playing card games.
Paul, speaking of Adepticon.
And looking cool.
And gearing up to start working on the terrain for that.
Because the 7 boxes of terrain is not enough.
Oh,
So
no,
back
not
me
even
up.
close to it.
Gearing up to start working.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really like to want to think about starting to work. Is it that sort of thing, or
No,
several stages past that?
I realized that the skill set that I possess was not the skill set that I want in order to make the terrain the way that I want it to. So I've spent the last 2 weeks figuring out how to make that happen. So I'm pretty satisfied that I have hit the point where I'm able to do it now. So
Nice.
I wanted to make sure that I can execute the idea before starting working on it, which is a new thing for me.
Well, I know that when you built the terrain originally, you used some of, I believe your dad's woodworking, or your, and so using those tools to kind of work with the material and learn how to use that.
Yep.
Can you give us a sneak peek or what kind of skill did you need to adapt?
So there's a term called mitering.
Okay.
We're able, instead of a 90-degree cut on a material, it's to make a 45-degree cut. And that was something that I had to be able to figure out how to do on 3 by 1 inch pieces of PVC foam. And turned out it was a lot more complicated than I thought. And I probably made a lot of more mistakes than most people do, just because I don't know the history of being able to work with that material. So
Yeah.
I had to learn how to do that.
Very cool.
Hey, Eric, what you been up to?
Well, season 2 of Dogs of Warcry launched just last week.
What's that?
Podcasts around the game Warcry.
I don't like any of those.
So Josh and Paven have stuck with it, and we've got some new stuff for this year. So that's taken some time. And then Warcry League. Having the Warcry League and the Underworlds League on Thursday nights at our local store, it just makes for a really fun atmosphere and a lot of a lot of people hanging out and playing games. So
yeah, it was cool. Just with the both games, we were a little worried would we kind of run out of room for one or the other, but it hasn't been a problem yet. And they've been pretty adaptable as far as making that happen. And there's just that extra energy having like a full house.
I think it'd be fun some night to do a 2-game night where you just pair people up. You teach Warcry players Underworld. You teach Underworld players Warcry, just to kind of mix people, get to know names and that sort of stuff.
Sure, I think that's a good idea.
Just put it out on the spot here. It may be a terrible idea. It may not work at all. But
Aaron, what do you think about that?
I've got a much better idea. Here's the deal. One player plays Warcry versus the other player playing Underworlds on like an Underworlds board.
Yeah.
And let's just get crazy.
Here's the
with
thing.
it.
Warcry has way more activations. So it just
Well, you just have to take that into account. I bet Davy would do just fine. All right. ATC team winning Davy
Something.
would need, yeah.
we need a Bobby Fischer situation. We'll get somebody like Cam, like real talented, have him stand in the middle, and he'll play a Warcry game here while playing an Underworlds game on the other table
versus AI.
We should call up Deep Blue. Yeah, I think that'd be a good solution for this problem.
And then when one guy dies on one game, you actually get to bring him over into the other game.
No, he dies in real life. Yeah.
Murder game ball. Okay.
And Vince just standing around like a bloody knife.
Yeah. Otherwise, I've been building a new ironclad idea for the Kharadron Overlords. Only this one has ogres on it.
It's pretty intense.
It is. Ooh, I need tents. But yeah, so that's been fun. It's been a while since I had a big meaty project to convert and sink my teeth in. It's just been doing a lot of content over the last year.
Meaty, sinking your teeth
Yeah.
in, ogres.
Yeah,
I
let's
get
go
it.
have buffalo wings.
Sure, yeah. Let's take the show on the road.
But that's been what's up for me.
Cool. You guys want to do a little story phase? Name of the game here.
Let's do a big one.
Yeah. Ooh, a big one. Well, we're all here. We might as well.
Yeah.
We can share that load. All right. So we're here to talk about the Kharadron Overlords. Paul, read me that sweet story phased intro thing.
The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms.
I think I just said we're going to read or talk about the Kharadron Overlords Battletome, but I'm going to say it again because that's how important it is, so y'all don't forget. So this is KO have been around for a while now. I think 2017 is probably when they released, but we figured we didn't really cover them per se last time their first Battletome came out, so it was high time that we gave them their due diligence. Now. High time with this recently released Battletome, however long ago it was.
2017 is correct.
Yeah, I'm a
Nailed
genius.
it.
Ding, 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 ding,
I
ding.
can do this all day. Give me another one.
Whoa, Aaron, you rigged the balloons to drop. I feel like you rigged that up.
But they're like, look at their engine rigger. Ow! Oh, God, it hurts because Aether Gold isn't real, nerds. All right, so for anybody who doesn't know, who's been asleep, I guess I don't know this whole time, could we try and catch them up? Let's reacquaint the world.
Maybe
with
they've
the
just been below the clouds this whole time.
Quite possibly, they've been landlocked, and we've been up. We've had our heads in the clouds.
Yeah.
Would
Ascended.
you guys be willing to make an attempt, give a try at summing up the Kharadron Overlords in one sentence only? Eric's raising his hand. He wants to do it.
All right. A group of duardin left the past behind to rise above it all, find their fortune, sell it to everyone else in the realms while looking down on them.
Was that a haiku?
Huh?
That's
Kinda
pretty
sounds
good.
like a haiku.
That's pretty
Could have
good.
been. Hey, that was off the top of my dome, written down briefly before we started.
That's not the same thing.
Not off the top of your head. No.
I didn't edit it 3 times.
Who wants to go next?
All right, I'm going to go. So they are godless duardin sky sailors with a steampunk and industrial flavor that fly skyships and hunt for ether gold.
All right, Davey, give me your best shot.
Mendacious mercantile mercenaries mining monetary
Minerals.
minerals.
For Mornar.
Motivated by
They're
making money.
Yeah, motivated by money.
I appreciate mendacious. That was easily the biggest word that we had.
You know,
I'm
I've-
mendacious. I don't know
I've
what
been
mendacious
pushing puns all this time, but I didn't know alliteration was your gift. So I feel like I feel like we deserve more of that in the future.
Yeah.
Just putting it out there.
Keep that in mind.
So, Aaron, what's your one sentence?
Well, no, I don't have to answer the question. I asked.
I'm putting you on the spot.
The judges say.
right now.
I'm the one who knocks.
No, wait, you think that of me? I didn't write it down. I'm like, you.
You want my word puzzle?
No, I'm
Write it
okay.
down. I obviously didn't write it down because I got halfway and ran out of steam.
Did you know going into it that you're going to do that though?
I thought of it while I was locking eyes with Paul. So
Intense.
Those eyeballs, inspirational.
Yeah. I was 2 words in when Paul was about to start. So.
Nice.
Let's say like mercantile duardin.
Mercantile, good choice. I like
it.
that.
Yeah.
Sometimes just Merc.
Manning, piloting skyships. I'm just going to repeat what you guys have already said. The fourth person doesn't really have a lot of creativity left.
That's why I went first.
They have a lot of excuses though.
That's sure.
Are you an F1 driver? Is that what's going on here?
Hey, they're not excuses. They're loopholes in the code.
Yeah, that's true. So mercantile duardin, manning airships, decked out with extensive arcano technology, on the hunt for mystical, magical aether gold that powers the aforementioned tools.
Manning airships. Your biases are showing.
Yeah,
buddy.
right. Eesh. Awkward. So manning and womaning airships.
Crewing.
I knew what I was doing. No accidents. Guys, so I think we have painted an entire picture of this race. Episode done.
Yeah.
I'm missing one word from my little word thing here.
Please lay it on us.
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy.
Oh man,
yeah.
that should
That was that was
Oh,
belonged
man.
there.
And did anyone include the code in their description?
No, nobody included the code either. We talked about that. I literally spent like 30 minutes trying to come up with every word I could think of to describe it, and I failed miserably to fit them in one sentence.
Well,
What's
that's
the
the blurb. Where are we at now? What's next?
Oh, you were, so I
thought that was it.
I'm
That was the whole
glad
thing?
you asked.
This is all after the credit stuff, but yeah.
Sure. No, I am glad you asked because now we can break into some of these interesting things that make the KO what they are. So let's start with the mercantile aspect of it. The buying and selling. They're traders. I was going to by trade, which seems redundant. What about that sticks out for our KO?
I think where they've kind of taken everything and boiled it down to a price or a cost. No longer do they have the same kind of reverence for things like their ancestors had, where they may have revered a place. Well, on the surface, it seems this way, right? The mountains that their ancestors grew up in and held so dear, they were able to leave that behind, and then from there, kind of just feel like a more pragmatic. Everything's for sale.
Ruthlessly pragmatic, you
Yep.
might say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect of that, the meritocracy and mercantile life. Everything's for sale. Everything's got a price.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would also just amend that everything is for profit, right? They don't really worship a god. They don't really have a religious system. But the one thing that is overarching throughout the whole race is they seek and try and increase their profit at every turn.
And what is important about this, other than just some background, it defines how they interact with the greater Age of Sigmar world, right? Like any army, you want to know why they're fighting, or why would they interact with this army, or why would they fight this army, or in what way would this battle come to pass? And their mercantile nature is defining that for them. So, and it's fun because it lets you make some connections that you would have been hard pressed to make with more traditional duardin from the old world. So, I mean, I think even in our Trail of Fears, the skirmish campaign that Eric ran for us, like we set up that my overlords had some interactions with Aaron's Ironjaw's tribe, and you were able to do that. I had, was able to do a fair piece of background on that, and it didn't feel forced or out of place. I mean, even this book mentions that it is kind of rare, but not unheard of, for them to trade with the orc, the greenskin tribes. I was like, right on.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I hope I'm not wandering too far afield by bringing this up, but it's interesting that it kind of relates a little bit to the other main duardin faction of the Moral Realms, which is the Fire Slayers, which is they're also willing to wheelin, sort of
That's
negotiate with folks for a similar but not exactly the same reason. They're not necessarily motivated by money per se, but rather this particular brand of money, which this isn't a Fire Slayer episode, we don't need to get into. But like that ends up being sort of a hallmark of most of the duardin races that we see in the mortal realms.
And that's what they've done well with Age of Sigmar in general, is take some of these tropes, traditional fantasy ideas that we're all well familiar with, and take a twist. So both these duardin factions we've seen are pursuing money, but they're doing it for reasons that are not, the traditional that we're used to seeing, in Tolkien-esque sort of fantasy. And I like seeing that familiar. It's cool to have that familiar piece that's got the twist on it, rather than just being like, here's something like 180 degrees away from that. Like that's a cool way to approach it.
Yeah, it reserved the greed, which kind of is a hallmark of all the duardin or dwarf and even other fantasy systems. But it really scaled it down to allow you to understand how this grade is different from that grade, right? And that's a really successful thing to do, especially with the KO versus the Fire Slayer versus the normal duardin that live in the 8 realms. So
sure,
I think that because they're quite a bit different than what were traditional duardin, I feel like the Fire Slayers made one step on behalf, one step for duardin kind of thing, where having that little twist where that Urgold was so important that they would work for chaos, or they would work for destruction in return, made it easier for us to maybe make that jump for KO, where they're like, yeah, we would do the same for anybody. So it's kind of, it didn't feel out of place once we had those rules in place.
Sure. Speaking of out of place, let me ask you about the next maybe hallmark of this faction. No longer ground-bound, these sailors of the sky, but rather now they are bedecked on their airships, flying all about the mortal realms. What about that grabs your guys' interest?
I mean, again, it's a cool twist, and I just talked about how like it was cool to see something that was 180 degree switch. This is right, like, and this sort of came to pass. I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead here, but during the Age of Chaos, as the duardin are retreating, some retreat downwards and are presumably overcome, or may however they get, or maybe Fire Slayers
still there.
Yeah, maybe they're still there. Root Wardens went deep. Yeah, I remember those guys.
I do.
Yeah,
Think about them every day.
Rad as heck. But some of them retreated upwards, and then when you run out of places to go up on the mountain,
sky's the limit.
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of a cool idea of how it came to pass, and so it started out as like a desperate escape, and then cobbled together. I mean, it really feels like post-apocalyptic for them in a different way. Like we had to leave behind, and it's that that whole incident. We'll talk about that more, some of the other aspects of them, but it's very defining to how their culture came to exist. Was this escape, and how they got in the position where they had to escape, and the challenges it put on them. It was a real crucible of their formation as a culture.
Crucible, nice, I like it.
Solid.
I think too. I love that they took dwarves that are typically underground, earthbound, almost like that. Making the joke of them being short because they're just so close to the earth and would be unwilling to change that, and they just went to the extreme on the other side and put them up in the air first, like they're the first ones up in the air, really. And the airships, like in order to do that, you believe that because of the trope of their craftsmanship, like that they could build something that's worthy of that could get them there. Like they're ingenuitive enough that would work. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think the character of the aeronauts is really just such a compelling image. And I think they successfully have managed to combine the duardin with the aeronaut. But again, keeping with the duardin trope, they're dependent upon mining. But instead of being mined from the ground, it's mined from the air with this ether gold. It's a lot of combinations of keeping the tropes and twisting them together. And I mean, the miniatures really tell the story really well. But the Battletome just gives you the background that helps you to understand where that story came from. And I think they did a really good job with that.
We can jump into Ether Gold in a second. I just don't want to miss the opportunity to make this goof. But I can only imagine this scenario where GW is like, all right, when you have to come up with these new races, what do we got to do? Well, we've got duardin. They'd like to live in the ground. Wait, what if they lived in the sky? We've got these elves. Normally they like to live in forests. Wait, what if they lived in the ocean, though? I mean, all you had to do is take an army and be like, no, but what if they lived somewhere else? And then boom, brand new Age of Sigmar army.
Well,
you can hire me.
Not a bad spitball session.
Yeah. But I think that the success to me is that it's not like, oh, we just put them underwater. No, we created this whole culture, right? I just read that Black Library book that just came out, and the way that they've encompassed it and then put that thought into the design is really what sells it. I mean,
which was basically, what if we put them in the ocean? And then like, oh man, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, I'll make it make sense.
Right.
Yeah.
No, flying sharks are what sell it.
Oh, it does feel like that's the seed, though. Is like, what if this, and then let's do the thought experiment of where that leads us. So,
yeah, let's go crazy
to some
and
cool
then
places.
make it sane. And that's, yeah. it's an
You know that
awesome
means that
thought.
there are things that they've paired and they have not been able to carry that thread all the way. And we're like, no, burn that to the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, we're missing
save
those
it for
umbrella
later.
duardin,
Yeah.
the Mary Poppins race. It's completely gone. Sorry. Obliterated from history.
All right, Paul, you brought up the Aether Gold. Let's talk about that because that's another hallmark of this race. So tell me more.
Again, twisting the trope on its head. As opposed to mining something solid, they're mining something that's gaseous. And not only gaseous, but it's lighter than air. And it is super easy to be transferred around on the winds, which actually is causing an issue in this book because we've had the gaseous spell go off, right?
Which we'll talk about, yeah.
Which we'll talk about.
specifically when you say transfer around winds, like magical currents affect it.
Absolutely. And so they are dependent upon these streams for everything, from the food that they eat to the cities that they live in to their warfare. Everything is dependent upon it, which is a really interesting crux for the civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It brings some things because it's not maybe fully understood. They're doing a lot of experimentation on it. There's this big push science over magic and science over gods and that sort of thing in this. And so they're experimenting, trying to think, and it's weird where it exists. Like they know that it's being affected by these magical winds, but I think they're viewing magic as, well, if I just figure out the rules of it, then it's essentially just another law of nature, and I can treat it with scientific action. And I think that's how they get those to exist. But back to the Aether Gold, they're not sure if it's a renewable resource. They don't know if it's exhaustible or not. And so there's some that are worried that, hey, we're consuming this faster and faster and faster and growing more and more hungry for it. What happens if we use it all up? Like, have we hit peak Aether Gold? Like that's the concern here. And so that creates sort of an ominous undertone for some of this.
And also a real life parallel a little bit.
Ouch.
Yeesh.
Too real.
That connects into one of my favorite themes that's really brought to the fore in this book.
Is it environmentalism?
Is it an unreliable narrator?
No, actually.
Yours is better. I'm going to cut mine out.
Is it interesting?
I believe so.
We'll
But
be
you be the
of that.
judge. Is the industrial theme. Not only just industrial, but heavy, polluting, soul-crushing, like Victorian Industrial Revolution theme to this race. I don't recall that from the last Battletome, and it really is illustrated very well in this one.
It, before we get too far away from Aether Gold, it comes up specifically that Aether Gold is super caustic, and a lot of its byproducts are. So very, very dangerous in and of itself, like it's a hazardous material. But yeah, and they talk about the difference between some of the skyports.
Yeah.
Some of the more traditional barrack thring uses these old, some would say antiquated versions of powering things, but their air is way cleaner because they're like, the old ways.
Old ways are
sometimes-
better.
Yeah, and especially the way they're talking about the way that the Kharadron society is ordered. We're seeing the Arcanauts, right? But the vast majority of the duardin don't ever make it into the air. They are working the docks if they're good, right? If they are wealthy, they're living in these floating mansions. If they're not, they're working in the factories.
Yeah.
Right? They're living in these cramped conditions, just full of pollution, and toiling and toiling. And they even talk about the water being polluted and just dropping onto the land below. And that's a really cool just image.
Not for the people below.
True. But it's a great hallmark of how this race functions. And it's a great illustration of profit at the cost of everything.
I was really liking them for a little bit. Thanks for that, Paul.
You're welcome.
Cool. Well, then I'm going to bring up the last, at least to my mind, hallmark of this race, and that is the ethos that they abide by when doing all of this stuff that we just sort of described. As they call it, do they call it themselves the Kharadron Code? Kharadron Code? That's a little. I mean, couldn't think of a better name. That's a little on the nose, don't you think? But this is a code that. Basically, all of these duardin live by. It's an exhaustive, thorough, and a third word that means those two things, code that basically rules any number of interactions between the Kharadron, between themselves, how they interact with the world at large, how they go about their mining of this ether gold, how they're supposed to man their ships, etc., etc. And it's, I think, a fun little inclusion that anything they do can always be referenced back to this nebulous, not necessarily easily defined code that can be sort of interpreted in different ways. And because of that, they can always, any of their maybe unscrupulous actions oftentimes are supported and pushed by the code that they're following. Tell me more about the code, fellas. What do you guys think about it?
Well, it was created in a council on this floating island called the island of Gibraltar, which is a really fun pun for me.
Is it Madrid and Malta?
Malta is an island.
Yeah.
And I believe there were councils that were held on Malta. So I think this is
a famous conference of Malta during World War II. Get the allies kind of figure out what they're going to do. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard talk about crossing the Rubicon, and I'm crossing into 40K here, so I apologize. But crossing the Rubicon is actually a term that was used in war. And now when they talk about Primaris, they talk about crossing the Rubicon. Huh. So they're starting to get more actual war lexicon into Warhammer and Warhammer 40K. And it's a fun way of making everything seem more realistic and more
I want
fantasy.
stuff to feel less realistic.
Get your facts out of my fantasy.
Nonsense. Yeah.
But basically the idea is that once they managed to rise up into the air, everything got better because they were able to defend themselves and they were able to subsist on their own without being constantly fought. And when there is peace above, of course, strife follows as everybody's saying, well, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. And they were fighting constant civil wars back and forth.
Yeah, those were mines. Those were mines. Those were mines.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in the early days, resources are very scant. You know, they don't have all their technologies, and it's all desperation to survive. Yeah. And we talk about that post-apocalyptic environment. Yeah. Like that's a theme that comes with a lot of post-apocalyptic media. You know, what do you do with other survivors? Are they friends or foes? And here they started leaning towards foes. Like they were on the verge of, after escaping chaos, maybe wiping themselves out. And so then they sat down and had a big ham session to figure it out and set up basically a code of conduct, rules that would govern their society. And they're exhaustive. But like all rules, there's loopholes. And that's some of the funnest parts.
Well, and I think, this
Why are you smiling so big?
This is one of those things that makes them duardin that we know, right? Because, the duardin that we know or that we're familiar with in the past have a very structured way of doing things. It's often dictated by ancestry, by blood, and this is the antithesis at the same time. It's just another version of creating that order out of chaos and kind of you're almost judged by how well you adhere to that order, right? In the same kind of way. The other side of it, though, is it does feel like instead of that structure making room for grudges as a basis of, keeping track of how you've been wronged, this came out of trying to create more peace. So there's while there's loopholes, it almost feels like gives room to let go of grudges, right? It gives you room to not have to keep track of that. I'm sure there's still grudges and all that kind of stuff, but it just feels like a more permissive. It feels like a more peaceful version of creating order, and it puts it kind of gives that pick you up by yourself by the bootstraps and make something of yourself a little more go west, young man kind of mentality, which has its own perils in the system. But yeah, kind of tries to do away with grudges.
It kind of seems like there's less opportunity for a grudge where if you were quote unquote wronged, but someone was able to point to the code and be like, no, but I got away with it because of this. You'd be like, it's not your fault. It's the code's fault. I mean, not the code's fault. Like, well, okay, I should have known. I should have known better. Yeah. It's written right there.
You know what they call that when you can skate through those?
I can't wait.
Gleaming the code.
Oh, goodness. That is
I don't quite get the reference, but it's still fun.
Oh, you know Admiral Christian Slater?
It's an 80s movie called Gleaming the Cube about skateboarding.
I was more of a Brink guy myself.
That's right.
That was inline skating.
I mean, it was good. It was a super deep cut.
Real solid.
It's not important unless everyone's laughing.
I mean, yeah. As far as trying to make a real world parallel, it's basically a constitution, right? For Americans, as we are. It's a constitution that is constantly getting amended, constantly getting changed. And
constantly under attack.
Exactly. Constantly under attack by Mornar. But there we go.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting, like Eric was saying, interesting detail of this culture and civilization. And it defines everything that they do. But at the same time, it defines the limitations of how far they can go.
And this calls to mind, I guess, in that as far as order armies go, like there are fewer order armies that are more order than KO are, right? Because I mean, they literally have a document to define how they go about, like how society even runs. Like that's quintessentially an order.
Nagash is a bit more ordered.
Well,
he wants to be.
Is this the conversation? Is this the direction you?
He's got to be brought up once in a while, like every show.
Sure. Friend of the show, Nagash. So I feel like we've tiptoed around it a little bit. Maybe we dive into some of the origins of this race from whence they came. I think Davy sort of brought up generally where they're coming from. Do you want to tell the tale real quick?
Well, there's some interesting things. So that the duardin end up in primarily in, but not exclusively in, Shaman. And Grungni does not. Grungni, the Smith god, he's one of the original pantheon. As far as Age of Sigmar goes, he's not one to coddle his followers, and they're not one to accept that. And so once he's got them set up, like, I'm out. I got things to do. Yeah. But it does say he left humans, duardin, and golem kind in Shaman. Whoa!
Yes, we do have a new
weirdly
race for sure.
Yeah.
Was this location called out in the first book?
I don't remember it specifically saying that he set them down in Shaman.
Basically,
this felt new to me.
That because I remember in early days, we were in Shaman for the Realm Gate Wars, and we saw stuff going on in the distance that we thought maybe was hearkening to these guys. But yeah, Grungni set up a space for like a paradise in the middle of Shaman with resources and jewels and gems and just the riches of the realm for them to create their civilization in. And that was interesting to me that there was this Eden that he created. So that we know that the pantheon like set up the realms for mortals of different kinds, but this was felt like the first time we got like a real picture of like what was Grungni's idea of that for people, and that was really awesome.
Yeah.
So there is a realm stone for this realm, as there are for all of them, called Shamanite.
Shame on you.
And this has allowed them to make this wondrous technology that really isn't possible in the other realms. That's one of the defining characteristic of this paradise that Grungni has set up for them. But the really interesting thing to me is that this doesn't really seem like a mortal world. This seems like a heaven. And so to me, that usually applies to the realm of death. But Grungni has basically built a heaven for these mortal duardin in Shaman. And they are allowed to live there unmolested for almost millennia, it seems like. They're able to just toil away, doing exactly what they love. And he has specifically put everything that they need and everything that they want to do in this paradise. And when Tzeentch gets a hold of this, because that's what we're moving towards, it is literally paradise lost. And it is because of this specific god beast called a load griffin.
Get a load of that griffin.
Exactly. So this load griffin is drawn into this place that becomes known as the Spiral Crux. by Tzeentch. And when the Load Griffin lands in this area, the magnetic force of his presence warps and tears everything apart.
Is this where the duardin figure out some way to turn it to gold? Like, hey, this is how we're going to take it
and
down.
they're pharaoh mages. And there's human pharaoh mages as well. And they're already
leveraging Aether Gold at this point. They've found it, so it exists already. They call it the Breath of Grungni, but yeah. They're harness that to turn this god beast into gold, but its death scream tears open a rift.
Yep.
And then it's bad time.
And yeah, so the rift opens wide, and just demons start pouring out, which is where sort of what we were talking about before, where a lot of races go to hide, they go to ground, or they go to the opposite of ground, which is sky. As the duardin sort of climb their mountains higher and higher and higher, and like we said, there's nowhere else to go but up, and they lean on their technology and this sort of relatively recently found Aether Gold to raise their fortresses up into the sky. And these are sort of the foundational sort of pioneers or pilgrims of the Kharadron Overlord race.
They call them the Steamhead Pioneers, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, literally? I thought I came up with pioneers.
You did.
No,
you did. It's
sorry,
okay.
you
It's
didn't.
fine. You did. You
It's
got
my
that.
idea.
Yep.
Perfect.
But the Steamhead Pioneers see this coming, and they build engines underneath the holds, right? So we've heard of black arcs before, but these are sky arcs that the Duardin are building to lift up their cities into the sky.
Well done.
Bravo. Oh, I wouldn't have thought to do that.
Yeah, it's like peak performance there. Peak engineering.
Because they're mountains. Get it.
No.
Davy, no, come back.
Don't walk upstairs.
This was working fine with 3. I'll be upstairs.
Y'all don't need me. All right. And I think it's at this point, we're sort of transitioning into the Age of Chaos. It's like this attack was sort of one of the crossing over points from the Age of Myth to the Age of Chaos.
And we've found a number of ways that factions are defined is by how they responded to the Age of Chaos.
Yeah.
You know, what was their reaction? And here, the fact that Grungni was gone, didn't come back, Sigmar took off, part of the way through the Age of Chaos, closed the doors. They had to get by on their own, and so that was sort of deep in their psyche. Is like, we did this without the help of gods. We survived the Age of Chaos. We did it on our own ingenuity with the help of the code. And so they're fiercely independent in that nature, and that's kind of there's a lot of the Age of Chaos, waves of demons and so on and so forth. And we've talked some about the code and all that, but
It's not to keep drawing parallels to Fire Slayers. I don't even particularly like Fire Slayers all that much, but the fact
do you like?
Wow, you're just gonna offend
Kenny.
a whole
no,
race?
I don't.
Kenny,
I don't,
I'm sorry.
I don't
I'm sorry.
dislike them. I just don't like them a lot. The point being is
Save
that,
it.
but they also,
Smooth.
they also didn't survive the Age of Chaos necessarily with the help of their god per se. You would argue that maybe our goal is the help of their god, but like
he did go and get himself killed by a salamander.
Sure, and then they just spread the wealth. But the point being is like they also didn't have a god to go to in the Age of Chaos.
Duardin don't need no body.
Apparently not.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things about them is that
We'll see about that.
they abandoned their realm stone, Shamanite, and instead are dependent upon this non-realm stone called Aether Gold. So not only have they abandoned their god, they have abandoned their realm, really.
Yeah, okay, by then I didn't really
Kind of, although they all, with one notable exception, are still operating in Shaman. Sure. The major ones.
Yeah.
But,
though, I mean, GW would say, oh no, you're whatever barrack can be from it, wherever.
well, I mean, it specifically just does say the major Sky
the major
Wars.
ones,
The ones with a seat on the Guild Rod.
6.
Too true. I'll ask, is there any Age of Chaos then stories that folks were drawn to or wanted to talk about?
I really like the Great Sky War.
Tell me about it.
This is literally where they rise up out of the mountains, taking with them the holds. And they talk about how in this one they're defended by gyrocopters and gyrobombers, right? They haven't even developed their ships yet. And it is this constant warring battle against Tzeentch. And this is where their time of peace, their time of great acceleration comes from.
I mean, it feels very Battle of Britain, like the valiant solo pilots. Like it's pretty cool. Like I had those vibes in there. It's like, I like that.
Yeah, there's no destroyers. It's literally just one-man ships going out and taking out everything.
And this is also the time during the Age of Chaos is when that Conference of Majoralta happens. And so I think we talked about it before, but it's worth bringing up that it's while they're up in the skies is when they realized that they needed to get together and, sort of work as one. Otherwise, they would have tore themselves apart.
Yeah.
But Age of Chaos basically just rolls on underneath them while they're floating around, trading with each other, mining that ether gold. And it's not till the Age of Sigmar hits when these Stormcast Eternals come rocketing into the mortal realms where they start to really interact again with the realms. So they've sort of been, not on a hiatus, but they've been put on pause a little bit, doing their own thing. And now they've seen that it's maybe worthwhile to revisit those mortal realms and maybe Chamon specifically, and reintegrate into society.
And I remember there were obtuse references to this during the Realm Gate Wars, like the clouds high above the mountains, strange gold clouds and flashes in the clouds above.
Oh, were there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And we were like, oh, is that Tzeentch? Is that something else? What is that? And it was, so they, right from the start, there were, I think they had the idea that they were going to do something like this.
Smart.
Yeah.
And
smart.
This ties right back into talking about profit, right? When the Stormcast chambers open, that's when the free cities start coming out, and the stability is there to allow the Kharadron to determine that there is profit to be made.
Sure, because they don't jump in right away. As soon as the gates open, they're not like, all right, this cavalry charge time. Like, we're going to wait and see. We got by okay. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure that we're not going to tip our hand and get ourselves in a bad spot.
Yeah.
That leads into one of the stories that I really liked, and that was called The Grand Tour. And this was a case of Brock Gundrenson deciding to go and meet with some of the Stormcast, take a tour, and they go to Greywater Fastness, which is kind of that industrial Ironweld city of Sigmar, to kind of see what everything's about. They mention Valius Malidi as the chief architect. And it says that, so he goes into kind of tour the facilities, see where their technology is at. And there's an abrupt stop to the tour. He goes back to his ironclad or to his ships. They take off without a word. And we don't have confirmation of what caused him to
cut off
take
trade. Right?
Cut off trade. So I want to pose to you guys, what did Brock see that caused him to flee? Not flee. Just leave.
I don't know what he saw specifically, but I think he tapped into... Wait, I don't know if it was said in this book, or is this something I know from somewhere else?
You know it from somewhere else.
Okay, gotcha. But I don't know what he saw, but I think he's been tipped off that the folks he met with, the leadership of that city, not what they appear to be. And I think we know from other sources that there is a Tzeentch influence, maybe a Tzeentch infiltrator in that town.
Gotcha.
One of their age-old enemies. And so he sniffed it out some way, somehow, or I don't know, maybe just has a bad vibe. The guy's, he's gotten by.
He's got a bad feeling about
this.
this.
So that's enough for him to cut stakes.
I'm glad we have some story there. I wanted to speculate that maybe he saw some tech that maybe they had stolen from the KO or from some other engagement and were adapting, or the opposite, that it was just so far below them, because it also talked about how they'd already gone through kind of the cog age themselves and had surpassed that some time ago. And so there's maybe not enough here to offer.
Not much to do. Yep.
But
I don't think that precludes it.
Well, it could be all the above. Right. But I like that there is I thought that was a mystery, but no, it's not a mystery.
Like the mayor or something is actually like a Tzeentch.
I think, and I've not read the new Tzeentch book, but I think that is where people were drawing the connection. Like, I think there's a reference there to a cult burgeoning in Greywater Fastness.
And if anybody's sniffing out, I think the KO would be the ones to do it. Also, speaking of stories that this time frame reminds me of, there's one of the first, I guess, interactions of the KO and this sort of new Stormcast forces is the Battle of Vindicarum, which is a free city in Chamon. It was being attacked by Tzeentch, surprise, surprise, and it was the Celestial Vindicators are sort of defending it, and it was a lot of airborne fights going on. It was the prosecutors versus, screamers and other things that the Tzeentch can throw at it, folks on discs and things. The prosecutors are doing what they can, but they're actually starting to get overrun quite a bit. But who should come out of the clouds, just barreling down, guns a-blazing, literally guns a-blazing, because they have guns and they're a-blazing, is the KO cannons firing. And they are able to turn the tide of this battle. And it's one of the first introductions between like the Stormcast and the Kharadron Overlords. And so it must have been at this point where the Kharadron either they have some sort of mercy or, sympathy. I don't think that's true. I think they realized, all right, well, you know what? I think these folks are probably worth trading with. They've got something that we want. Let's swoop in because we can't trade with a bunch of dead people. Right. Which is, we can talk about later, actually. But so they realized it was in their best interest to save the city rather than let it burn. And that is one of the introductions to these forces joining forces. And the two surviving armies, the Stormcast and the Kharadron Overlords, come to an agreement. And they introduce different trading agreements and things. And then some sort of loophole in the code was that the Kharadron Overlords are going to have sort of exclusive rights to the area, et cetera, et cetera. So by no means were they doing it completely generously, but they had some ulterior motives in saving the city.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to be the theme throughout.
And it does feel like it was that kind of agreement where Stormcast probably don't even know what they're agreeing to.
Or care.
Or care at that point, at which point down the road, they'll be like, I'm sorry, we already signed the deal.
I particularly enjoyed the Feeding Frenzy story. It is about a Kharadron army that is attacked by grot-bag scuttlers.
Of course. Of course. You did.
And they retreat through a megalofin herd. And I just like the image of the KO, like, nimbly steering in between and around and under, whereas the grot-bags are just, like, crashing into everything over and over. Because at the end of the story is that the Kharadron Overlord fleet does escape, and the grot-bag scuttlers do not.
I mean, that's a very Star Wars scene, right? Like, there's stuff flying around like asteroids and things. And
Space slugs.
Yeah.
They'd be crazy to follow us into a
asteroid field.
Yeah, sure.
That's actually the same one I picked because it had this idea of. So one of the cool things about this faction is that you can reach back into both naval history and aerial history of aerial warfare and naval warfare, and draw inspiration from those things. And so there's these cool stories of navies like been ambushed. We've got to do this desperate maneuver. If we can get through this perilous strait, then we're on the open seas and we can get away. Actually, and that's another thing, they use the term open airs is airspace that is not controlled by a skyport. It's far enough away. So there's the idea of like here's the sovereign air of a particular skyport, but the open airs. There's different things that apply there. But that touched on what I really like is when they use some of the historical references, or just give it that little touch of the idea of sort of the age of exploration or naval warfare of the 17th and 18th centuries, and pretty fun stuff. Yeah.
International waters. That's the phrase I was looking for. Couldn't come up with it. Well, and it's interesting because as time goes on, like the airs are oftentimes just as dangerous as any sea would have been, right? They have all sorts of things that, like, this is a dangerous region because the winds are particularly violent, or like, I don't know, there's some weird floating island or something like that. There's just as many perils in the sky as there would be for explorers on the sea. Yeah. There's those parallels.
I think here too, the fact that they introduced the grot-bag scuttlers, I think there's both in these stories, but also in the models and the hobbyists, where we've seen this army and it's inspired so much. Like, going to the air
captured a lot of imaginations.
Absolutely. And so just seeing, just thinking, broadening where we thought we could go in the mortal realms. And you see so many conversions. Paul's has his take on grot-bag scuttlers, and we've seen a few others, and Skaven, KO armies, and
Auric pirate,
there's just so many, like, we've put more things in those suits. We're like, we want more boats in the air. Like, if Age of Sigmar, if they tore it down and just made like Skies of Sigmar, I think we'd probably be okay with it. It feels like a large part of the player base or the hobby base would be like, yeah, just give us skyships and we'd be happy.
I mean, you could just reproduce Dreadfleet, but like for the air instead, right?
There you go.
I don't know much about Dreadfleet. I know Paul has it though.
Well, speaking of Kharadron technology falling into the wrong hands.
Oh, goodness.
There's another story that I liked about the Scrap of Spill. There's a big mountain of rusty metal, and underneath that scrap, that whole mountain was built on top of a Kharadron dreadnought named the Zangamendrung. and carried experimental weaponry and brought down during the Age of Chaos squadrons of. So they decided to go in and kind of try and take it out, like to come back and rescue it. Well, that didn't go as planned. They were able to like reveal it or like blow enough stuff up that they could confirm that it was there, but they got chased away and did not. Were not able to recover it. And in my head, I'm sure that I don't know if the grots there, the greenskins there had any clue that it was there, but now they do. And it feels like now they have the ability to resurrect this dreadnought and orcs and more goblins in the air with experimental weapons. Seems like it's a possibility in the future.
And they'll paint it red and it'll go fast.
Yeah.
It will go fast.
So I liked tying something that we've already heard about, seen, or thought about, and then now it's just got another purpose in the story or connects to another thing.
Well, and I think one of the other interesting things about the Battletome is that it talks about these larger ships, right? We've seen pictures of them before, dreadnoughts, and we have been mentioned before, but we start getting an idea of the actual industry of the mining itself. We're talking about these much larger harvester ships and what happens when they designate a field as theirs. And I particularly liked just that specific details, the specific details that allow us to be able to envision what happens when this is going on, right? And they're really focusing a lot on exploration at this point. And the exploration is because of the Garrick Tormund, which we had kind of mentioned before, which is when Nagash creates the Nadir, it creates this just mass confusion as the winds of magic just shift completely.
It's their term for the necroquake.
Exactly. And the Ether Gold fields that were here have moved who knows where, and now they have to go out and find everything. And this is definitely a new thing from the last Battletome. This is moving forward into the Perpetual Now, and the Perpetual Now for the Kharadron Overlords is everything is new. Everything has to be rediscovered.
New claims.
New claims. Even though everybody talks about how the fact that Ether Gold is never supposed to run out, they have lost significant portions of their mining. They've lost significant portions of their fleets. It talks about Barak Nar has lost a fifth of their fleet in the Garrick Tormund. So this is a huge, devastating event that's happening.
And yet, for every claim that they've lost, it's also a time for great discovery, as you sort of allude to, because there are new claims to be made. Mm-hmm. For every ether gold vein that sort of floated away on the winds, a new one maybe has floated back in some other place. And so there is a mad gold rush, literally aether gold rush, to go and restake new claims where claims did not exist before. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was, tangentially related to a previous claim, but that's not yours anymore. It's different. Yep. It's a new one. And so that means that there's opportunity for change and advancement for each of these skyports to reclaim stuff that maybe it belonged to someone else before, but no, now it's different. Yeah. So it all is not lost. I think somewhere it says in the Battletome that I forget what they even say, but the point is that in great times of great strife, there's great opportunity to be had as well. And so they are very optimistic about it. They don't despair at the situation. They realize, all right, when the change brings opportunity for advancement, which they hop on. It's an exciting time to be a corruption.
And one of those times somebody loses a spot on the council and somebody else gains because of that shift in wealth and who owns what. I think Zilfin ends up gaining a ton of stuff because of their quick ships. Other cases where, and I don't have the spot where it's all tracked, but one group of Kharadron are transporting people in kind of the wake of the necroquake, and they can't pay to keep going the rest of the way, so we dropped them off.
Yeah, in chaos infested wastes.
Yeah, so there's it's to your point, Davy, of in that strife, what is how you respond to tribulation definitely formed them coming out of the Age of Chaos, but then even in this necroquake, it kind of further sees what's the character of these barracks in response to the necroquake.
I think that leads really well into one of our listener questions from Mr. Mephisto. He asks if the KO have a stock market. And
I think he specifically said stonk market, which I don't get the joke.
I don't know.
But I want to properly represent his question.
Fair.
I think it's memed. Stonk is a meme for stock in modern internet.
I have no interest in that. No, I'm just kidding.
So I would say lore-wise, we have not seen specifically a stock market, but I would argue that they indeed do have a stock market, but the stocks are the admirals. They are the magnates, the lord magnates, the individuals that have the wealth, and you, as a young Arcanaut, will tie your fortune to a specific captain or to a Lord Magnate if you're lucky. And as his fortunes rise and fall, so do yours. And this is represented kind of well in some of the Black Library books. And it talks about how when the Garrick Tormund happened, one of the things that happened was in Barrack Nar, the docks were almost overrun by Nighthaunt, and they were defended by the Grunstock as the last line of defense. And so the city was saved, but 50 companies went bankrupt immediately, right? So there isn't a stock market per se, as in like a New York Stock Exchange, but because we have these powerful individuals, we do have you buy stock, as it were, in an admiral by signing on to their ship, or they're buying out your charter. And if they do well, you do well. If they do poorly, you do poorly.
Yeah, I'll say it's not called out specifically as existing, but if you wanted to say that your Skyport had one, I'd totally buy it'd be something that they would create.
But you would have to instead call it the grunt stock market, right?
Sure.
Is that what you'd have to? Thank you. So that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in this sort of post-Necroquake world. A couple other listener questions sort of tie into this a little bit. Koros from our Discord channel, by the way, if you ever want to...
Scarbrand's daddy?
Yeah, Scarbrand's daddy. Oh, yeah, you know him. Okay. If you ever wanted to ask a question of this illustrious podcast, you could do so whenever we put the call out in our Discord channel. There is no rhyme or reason as to when I do it, so you just have to be there all the time, like all of us are. Yeah,
never leave us.
Please leave there. But Koros did ask you, do you think they will play, they being the KO, will play a more significant part in the lore moving forward? And then also, I'll throw in Paven's question too. We can talk about both of them. Paven from the hit podcast, the breakout show of 2019, Dogs of Warcraft.
Thank you.
Any new plot developments or teasers about where their narrative is going? So both of those are looking forward. So this is where we're at now in the again post Necroquake world. What role do we think they're going to play in the future? Is there any hints or anything that we saw in this book? I don't think so.
Well, number one, Brock Rungson was my third pick for the draft for moving the plot going forward. So I'm hoping so.
Sure. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. There's an advancement of the campaign coming up soon. So yeah, there's that.
I feel like there's room for some more solidification of like their technology falling into other armies' hands, or an exchange of ideas where we either get more armies in the sky, or this is how the other things get advanced. So I think there could be that element of kind of their biggest asset, or the biggest interesting thing about them is their technology advancement. So I think maybe there's a space for that trade.
I'd say two things. One is that this new push after the Aether Gold seams have been blown all over, the new push, this challenge that has become opportunity, means that they're pushing and exploring. There's a chance they're going to pop in somewhere or encounter something that hasn't been interacted with as much, increases the odds of that. And the other significant one is that of these 6 major skyports that are part of the ruling council, one of them for the very first time has left the realm of metal. Is no longer in Shaman. They're not sure where it is, but it's somewhere super shadowy, and you can only get there through a realm gate.
Yeah,
and that feels significant. And the implication is that they're in Ulgu, which would make sense. The Shadow City is what it's sometimes referred to as, and we still don't know very much about Ulgu. And so by retreating there, they may be forging some alliance or finding something, or there's all kinds of things that could be fallout from that major thing. And as far as events that are significant to the Overlord culture at large, like this is a really big deal for them. So
To build off your first point about they're in explorer mode, basically, if you needed to introduce, you being GW, needed to introduce a new thing that hadn't really been discovered yet.
I'll be GW.
Well,
Thanks.
okay, cool. All right, so for this story, Eric's GW. But like, if you needed a way to discover that, which hadn't been discovered before, like these Kharadron Overlord explorers would be one way to introduce them. They're going on an expedition. They're trying to find more gold, and they've stumbled upon this thing. So it can serve as a story impetus. They can drive that plot forward in a direction to find some new things. So who knows what they can discover out there.
I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit and say Ether War pushes the narrative forward even from what's in the Battletome.
I haven't read it yet.
I know, but
Rub it in, why don't you?
it definitely starts to move it forward, and it places us back in this spiral crux, which is a place that has a ton of power. It's in the center of a realm, and there's a god beast that has been turned to gold there.
I mean, unless I'm mistaken, it is. I mean, the god beast has been turned to gold. This is that Paradise Lost you were talking about. Right?
Yep, exactly. So we're going right back to where the Kharadron started in this new box set. And I think there's a lot of potential for that to move forward into some new territory. Much less exploring back what happened to those civilizations that went down.
Don't they have
right?
Golem kind?
Where is Golem kind? Where are the Pharaoh mages? There's a lot of potential there.
Is it? Don't they talk about here in returning back to one of the mountains and trying to excavate and see if there's anybody still fighting? Fighting down in the depths or whatever. So we might find, in addition to Gollum, we might find new duardin or remade duardin
Or whatever
in the
they have
space.
become. Yep. Or Pharaoh mages. I mean, like...
What I was going to say is, what if, so Kharadron Overlords are, what if dwarves lived in the sky? But what if we found Kharadron Overlords that lived underground?
What would those? I can't even imagine.
What would they
duardin
even
in the
be
ground.
If you want to do Pharaoh mages right now, there's probably, you take a Cities of Sigmar priest. I mean, it may just, it's a cool thing where they can take this term and it could be something totally new, or it could just be a way of referring to, mages that specialize in shaman and magic.
Balthazar Guilt.
Yeah.
And
Alphys.
You guys have brought up a couple of good points talking about the, like how, just like one or two, of how these Kharadron Overlords, it seems like an afterthought, but I'm still going to bring it up, about how this faction's kind of like organized or how it's structured. Do you guys have any thoughts about some of that section of the book about how they live themselves, like in their barracks or guilds or other seed words I'm dropping on you right now?
If we go to if you have the Battletome, page 16 and 17
and
of the Battletome.
I hope all of our listeners always have the book directly in front of them while they listen to our episodes.
Page 16 and 17 are one of my favorite 2 pages of any Battletome that I've read in Age of Sigmar.
Ooh, tell us why.
So when we started Age of Sigmar, the question was, where are the farmers, right? These 2 pages explain where are the common people of the Kharadron. And they explain it in great detail. And they really gave me just a specific, fantastic image in my head of how everything works. I really appreciated the Ether Endrin mansions that they're talking about. They're talking about a story of one specific Lord Magnate, and he built his mansion and placed it directly above the factory that his father was working in, so he could literally look down. It really is this like rags to riches narrative that they're pushing with the way these admirals are moving forward, because that's a definite strong point of this culture, is that because it is a meritocracy, bloodline doesn't matter. What matters is how well you move forward. And one of the things that we kind of haven't talked about is that you have to be chosen to become an Archnaut. And there's also this other mercenary company called the Grunstock. And everything in Kharadron society is focused on being able to make this muster. And once the muster happens, then anybody that succeeds can go anywhere and do anything.
Yeah, in usual terms, I will mitigate your superlatives. I wouldn't say everything, but it's a big pressure for a young Kharadron they can go to the academy and they get 3 chances to pass muster, and if they don't, then you got to find some other role.
If they fall behind, they can always catch up to muster.
I was sitting there like, who else is trying to make a mustard joke right now? I'm sure
Not
someone
me.
is.
High five across the room.
But because of the Garrick Tornum, they've lost so many people. They're remustering again. They're allowing people to try out again. So there's another new potential because of the Garrick Tornum that allows more story points to move forward.
Sure.
I mean, I think what's interesting too is, I mean, there's this ideal of what, like you can be what you want to be, or, by your own merits. But I mean, we've seen this system before. It's still who you know, right? It's still, connections are as important. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different roles outside of just the ship life, which was really cool, that there's support for, working on the docks. There's support for all the things that go inside. I mean, there's somebody's got to run got to work in the factories and all that kind of stuff. And so there's, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if that's room to expand into, the exploring in the military are definitely the more interesting parts of it. But the fact that there are, highfalutin dudes in towers.
Yeah, it'd be great. I've not read Prophet's Ruin, which is the follow-on.
Yeah.
It would be great, and this may happen in there, I don't know, to visit a skyport and spend some time in it, which we haven't seen that yet.
And when we're talking about people working in the factories, people working on the docks, every aspect of Kharadron society is defined by the code, right? And we have another listener question in here from Tomb King Tristan.
Good job.
How does the code impact storytelling? And I think we've covered a bit of that when we talk about the muster, when we talk about how the people who work in the factories must live, when we talk about the mansions. But what it also does is it allows you to have a strong center to work your character's actions around. But even without a god, even without a faith, even without a religion, you can make good choices and make bad choices. And when we read Iron Dragon by C.L. Werner, one of the focal points is how, because this is a meritocracy, and the meritocracy allows even people who are on a boat to peacefully mutiny over their admiral, that you are allowed all these interesting narrative arcs that would never happen in a Free Guild army, right? They would never happen in an Illumineth army, theoretically, when we see that happening, because it is meritocracy based, and you don't have the power of a god that tells you that you're the one who's doing it. It's just whether or not you got the profit.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about that where if there is one of these peaceful mutinies or whatever, it's not even, it's hard to imagine, but they say there's not even any shame to, getting demoted. I'm like, I might feel some. But I mean, it's not, you're not suddenly outcast. All right, you're a member of the crew. You want back into your captain's spot? Show
Earn
it.
it.
Yeah, earn it.
I'll add just one more thing too, in terms of the code, is that we definitely see a lot of character of the different barracks defined by how they interpret the code. Thring is very old school, literal, read it as it is, right? By the letter. And you get Mornar, who lives in the gray. And so I think if you were, to tell a story about a duardin or a Kharadron Overlord one of the first things you should probably do is not just define which barrack they come from, but how they interpret the code, how they navigate that with other people is a foil to, I think, any KO should be measured by in storytelling. And I think if we were to see one in an RPG in the future, that would be one of those defining background things, is what does the code mean to them? How do they interpret it?
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And when telling stories, it's sometimes nice to have a set of rules, nebulous as they may be, so that you can go out of your way to break them, and make a compelling story that way. And so knowing that there is some sort of structure that you can, a box that you can think outside of when dealing with these stories, when dealing with the KO stories, is instructive and helpful in constructing a interesting story, I think.
Well, and when we're talking about the code, there are 2 pages in the Battletome that are literally just devoted to amendments that are proposed to the code since the Garrick Torment.
So what pages are those, Paul?
That is page 9 and 10 and 11, excuse me.
So that that is my favorite spread in the book for two reasons. One, it devotes a ton of space to the code, and it there's specifically so what we got: articles, amendments, and footnotes. And I'm going to get the specific numbers wrong, but I think it says something like there's just 7 articles in the code, but they have many points within it, and then amendments to that, and then footnotes to that, and they tie that into the rules later. And I bet you there's some resource, and I didn't think to go look for it, but somebody somewhere has to have compiled as much of the code as been put down
published,
and try to piece it together. I would love to read that. It seems cool.
There's sub amendments.
What's that?
There's even sub amendments.
Right.
Yep.
327B.
But that page gives us a look. I think it's a great thing to put in there because the code is so essential to how they do things. And like, here's a bunch of examples of that. And then here are amendments that were brought to these and the why, basically. And that's real fun. And they have a picture of all these different individuals from different skyports, including, significantly, a couple female duardin.
Bartha, Harold's daughter from Barrack Nar.
Yeah.
And Magbeth Isram from Barrack Warnar.
Which I love, because if you think of this, if this like super capitalist meritocratic society is there, then they're not going to say, well, you're female, obviously you can't do this. Like, hey, if you can hack it, do it. So I love, and this is something that wasn't in the last book. I think is a great step forward. That makes sense. So my favorite spread in the book is right there.
Well, and the interesting thing is that
We'll be the judge
it
of that.
moves the narrative forward from the last book, where one of the amendments is about being able to water down your ale against the Free Cities, right?
As the Mornar one.
Right. So playing on a trope, right, of like, they brew beer because they're Duardin. But another one says that there is now a specific group of individuals who are devoted to specializing in fighting against Night Haunt, particularly. And they have their own special uniform that they wear.
You're talking about the Grunstock company. They're all in black armor. They're specifically designed to be stopping ethereal types.
Death Company?
The Black Marines is what they're called.
Yeah. So another amendment to the code was something to the effect of like, well, if you're at war, it is utterly illegal for anyone to do business with the target of whoever you're at war with.
Economic sanctions on top of your
for as long as they draw breath. And they needed to amend the code because there was a problem. Because when you're dealing with OCR Bone Reapers, ain't nobody breathing over there. So they needed to include them because otherwise some shady individuals were still trying to strike some deals with the OCR Bone Reapers, coming up with all sorts of stocks of bones and trading, to get whatever they can out of them.
Well, and it makes sense too. I mean, they're relatively new to this, so they figure out how they'd interact. But you can believe that it wouldn't have come up before. I mean, maybe vampires you would have traded with, but like hordes of zombies, I'm not trading with them.
And you would think when you're drawing up a code, you'd know not to write stuff like as long as they draw breath. Like, you know where you live, man. But still, sometimes you gotta amend that code.
Well, but it also feels like the powerful are determining what the weak shall do, right? Or they're trying to close these loopholes in the code. And that's another interesting expression of the dynamic that exists within this meritocracy.
Every time you try and... I don't know that they're there to try and close loopholes. Well, I'm sure as many are trying to close as trying to open new ones.
Yeah.
Barrack Thring really doesn't like loopholes.
No, yeah, it's awesome. I love that. Like, to avoid any spurious, further amendments, we put forth that no more amendments may ever happen.
I love that.
All right, so a few more things before we get to the barracks, which is one of the most interesting parts of the book. But another way that, harkening back to sort of how society works and lives, we had sort of talked about the underlings of society, or just the regular people in the different jobs. However, you can aspire to a more interesting life as part of the military arm of a barrack. And a lot of these folks...
See the world!
Yeah, well, a lot of these folks can be sort of broken out into their respective guilds that would represent some of the models that we see on the table. That sort of corresponds to like a lot of our hero models. There's the is it just called the Engineer Guild? Yep. And so that is the combination of the Endrin masters who are in charge of like maintaining and fixing ships, but then also their engine rigger sort of proteges,
Yep.
the interns or what have you. And that's basically this is the school that teaches you how to do so. So that was one of my favorite guilds. Were there other guilds that sort of grabbed your guys' attentions that you enjoyed?
I like the Nav League. It exists there. If you think of how valuable an asset that is to this, and I think it would have been an easy thing to overlook when you were designing these. You're like, oh yeah, like the people who make ships, but like, you think of the age exploration, and you think of these things.
I always do.
How important it is to have somebody who is either able to make a map of where you're going if it's somewhere you've never been, or to chart you a safe course if you're going through something that people know. Like that's a real cool skill for them to have noticed and being like, yeah, this got to be an important part of this society.
Mm-hmm. So who do we know that's part of the Nav League? What
Model,
I guess, is, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean there is the navigator model.
Doesn't he have the
bunch
lenses?
Of lenses and yeah.
He's pretty cool.
compasses, and
Any other guilds
And then you got
companies that grabbed you guys?
the Aether Chemist Guild, rule of 3 here. And they are working the concoctions. They're experimenting with aether gold and other chemicals, and they can change the air around them. They can suck the air out of their enemies' lungs, and
also make a mean leader for Underworld's warband.
really cool oxygen bar.
Too.
Well, they also talk about chartered companies as well. So these are individual companies that are formed in order to sell a specific product. There's a little fun story here about the Igrin Kaz Aeronautics. It, for example, is renowned for the quality of its surge injection engines, which utilize liquidized ether gold to grant a vessel supercharged bursts of speed. And how they are now present in all 5, except for Barrack Thring of the major ports, because Barrack Thring is like, you're being wasteful and we don't like this, right? Like,
So here's the deal. I'm in the middle of a Fast and the Furious marathon currently.
Go. You go.
This is very squarely.
And when you get done, you just start it again.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and this is very NOS like because every single one of those movies has a NOS injector.
You got to hit it when you're shifting to 13th gear.
Basically. Okay, so you've seen them. So those are some of the guilds that make up I guess more of the character hero models of the army, and since we're here, we might as well talk about it. Do you guys have any favorite models or units from the KO range, whether it's model or how they play on the tabletop or their lore background? Now's the time to bring it up.
Challenging for Eric because he takes every model and creates it entirely from
He hates
other
it all,
models.
basically.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess for models, I've built and painted a frigate, which I really liked. I'm excited to do an ironclad, and what I'm excited about that is they've done such a good work, and I think I've maybe talked about this before. They've done such a good job of designing those models to be functional. So, hey, I've got this cupola up here that navigator's sitting in. Well, how would he get up there? Oh, well, we'll put steps in the struts. Okay, we've got a ramp that comes out. Well, they have to jump over the side. No, we'll create these hinges that, you can see that it's a hinge spot that would swing open. Here's a guy who's like, repainting the hull or addressing, they've thought of all these things to make them look like they're functional and real. And I think that really shines in the sky ships that they do, but the ironclad in particular.
Right on. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, my issue is that I always have to do something different, and
That
so
is an issue, yes,
what
correct.
I love about the range is that they didn't just come out with one boat. Like it maybe could have easily just been like one big boat as the centerpiece, and everything else is just rides in a boat or doesn't ride in the boat. But they've got the 3 different boats, and I think
You said the word boat.
but I think the everybody in the first book wanted that gunstruck gun hauler to be the best because it's just a zippy little thing, and I think be more useful than the latest book. I think it is super useful and is going to get a lot of play. We're going to see much more of these little zippy boats flying around and doing what they need to do, and so yeah, I really like that model.
Cool. Paul, what do you got?
I enjoy the engine master with dirigible suit.
Yeah.
I actually made a conversion of my engine master in the last edition. I added a balloon on the back of him, an engine on the back of him, and then I gave him some arms to do
Predicted it.
cool things.
Called it.
Called it 10 points.
Pauled it.
Nailed it.
Paul did.
I get that. I like that.
And I did get a copy of Ether War for the Kharadron specifically. So I really enjoy the Engine Master just because he's like fun and funky and really exhibits what's going on with the race, but like pushes it a little bit farther. But what I really enjoy about the Kharadron is that even though this is a new model designed for an existing model line, because they were all designed as such a very specific and intentional design note, even though we're getting a new model, it doesn't feel like it doesn't belong to part of the army at all. Everything is plastic, everything fits in really well, and it looks like an amazing centerpiece in this army now. So
He looks awesome. Plus, I love the way that he's like getting pushed backwards.
Dynamic,
Like, he's just floating. Because I mean, I don't know what he's propelled by. Like, he's on his floaty balloon thing, so his feet are kicked out, and he's obviously lighting dudes up.
In my head, every time those balloon guys shoot, they just go the opposite direction.
Oh, we should have put a propulsion system in this. Oh gosh. My favorite guy, similar actually, is the engine riggers, because I like that they're sort of the underlings, and they're still kind of learning how to use their balloons a little bit. So they're like, whoa, they're trying to chase like ships down. Be like, no, I got to seal that cut or something like that, because they are under the tutelage of the engine master, basically. So they're flying around, doing what they can to keep the ships in ship shape, and the admirals are yelling down, you got to fix that hole, and they're saying, oh, we're trying, as you know, the battle's flying all around them, and they're sitting there trying to weld like a seam or something like that.
But it's another cool thing where it's a functional thing. Like we want to be able to make repairs on the fly. So
Literally on the fly.
So with conventional navies, we'd have underwater welders who can go in and do some spot repairs or whatever the case may be. These guys, there's a reason for them to be flying around. You got to be able to get down on the side of the ship and do those repairs without going back to dry dock, sky dry dock,
I guess, or sky dock. And I don't begrudge them taking what would be a fairly mechanical, like utilitarian like job role, and then also making it a combat thing too, because they're drills and they're saws and whatever. I mean, nobody wants to get hit by one of those, so they're still combat ready. Because I mean, everybody needs to be combat ready, presumably in the moral realms. Like, there's no room for anybody who isn't really willing to chop some guy up. So I like how they sort of serve that double role, but they again have a very functional job out there on the ships, and you don't get. Honestly, think of the other armies. You don't get too much of that elsewhere. Like, everybody's always, a BA like fighter type.
Yeah.
But these guys are actually, they're working stiffs.
Well, and they do this with more than just them. If you look at the Arknaut models, a lot of their melee weapons, especially the axes, they'll have components. So you can see there's like a socket on the end, so they could use it as a wrench, or on the other end, they'll have wrench pieces or a screwdriver. And like,
that's
so they
cool.
can,
I'd noticed those.
Yeah, so their weapons are all sort of dual purpose, and that harkens back a little bit to traditional duardin weaponry, which was axes and hammers. So
and picks,
tools,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a cool callback too.
Yeah, that's neat. Anybody else have any other units or models they wanted to talk about? Because now we can talk about probably one of the more interesting parts of this book is the different. So they're different skyports that all happen to be called barracks, right? Am I getting that terminology right? So these are the different, however, different army books have their sub-factions and their different organizations from different realms sometimes, or they have different, ethoses or what have you. These are different skyports, the main skyports of the Kharadron Overlords.
6 skyports that have seats on the Geldrad, which is the overruling council of everything.
You found the name then.
I did.
Yeah, perfect.
Ridiculously, I'd used it earlier in the episode, forgot it in the middle of the episode, and then came back and found it.
Excellent. So now let's talk about our favorite.
It's that mid-podcast fugue state that you often go in after the puns are too heavy.
Yeah. Defensive, protective.
Let's talk about our favorite one of those. I'm going to have Davy go first, so no one takes his favorite from him.
Yeah, so Barrack Mornar is what I've got mine painted up as. And
very nicely.
Thank you. And I like that they. So I guess I should describe them. They're the Shadow City. They're the ones most likely to push the limits with the code, find the loopholes. In fact, this is what Eric was referencing. Was shortly after the conference of Madralta, they're like, "What is going on?" Like, there's still raids going on, and they were disguising their ships as other. They're finding like, well. Like, no, the code might have said, like, no ship in the colors of another skyport may fire on any other ship from another skyport. And they're like, cool, we'll paint ourselves up as you, and then we'll get you. And so they but it's a valuable role, right? Like you think, there's Thring, who are the traditionalists, and they're going to try and hold things from progressing. These are the ones that will, hone the edge of the code, like kind of test it, give it that trial by fire to like, all right, well, you won't know where it's going to break down unless somebody tries to find it.
Yeah, they're always poking and
prodding.
prodding.
They're the play testers of the code, right?
They're trying to break it.
Yeah, try to break the code, and then it becomes stronger as a result. But I like them because it feels like they embody, sort of the more, because they're willing to push the edge, push the limit. I think it opens your options up, like, and that's why when I was when we were doing our background for that campaign, I was like, yeah, these guys would be willing to trade with greenskins if they found enough reason to do so. Like they're have no scruples, and I like the idea of the sort of smuggling aspect, right? Like that exists in high seas narratives and pirates and smugglers, and they get to be in that spot. Plus, they're doing the interesting stuff right now. Yeah, and I will say, while we're talking about the Geldrod, one thing is that there's 18 seats on it. Mm-hmm. There's a big shakeup, and Mornar has risen the highest. They used to have 1 seat on the Geldrod; they're up to 3. And
opportunists.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I feel like there's probably an assassination in there somewhere.
Well,
might be.
And one of the little lore tidbits about Mornar that I really like is that they have their own black market that they're running. Like they can get the stuff that nobody else can get.
Yeah,
which is super fun.
Yeah.
So I remember being thrilled by their, like, so you'd mentioned the Shadow City before and how it's sort of hard to get to. Can we get into specifics on that? Because that's, I think, one of my favorite
I think it's impossible to get to at the moment.
There's a swirling shadowy realm gate. And,
where it was, right?
So
everyone used to know where it was, and now it's not there no more.
Yep.
Yeah.
And not impossible to get to. You can go through that gate, and then a black ship comes and escorts you back to where the city is, but there's no way for you to. Yeah, I don't know if they put a whole
it's the
hood over the whole
equivalent
thing.
Of being blindfolded, and so nobody's quite sure where their city.
And so folks would put the request in, like, "Where are you?" And they're like, "Not going to tell you.
Yeah.
If you want to find us, you come through this portal."
Yeah.
Well, and to tie it back into that Age of Exploration, right? Like it's a port completely surrounded by mist. Just happens to be in the realm of shadow, but this whole
presumably,
yeah. So.
What if it was light instead? Just messing with people.
Psych. Yeah.
Eric, do you got a favorite port?
Yeah, I think there's 2 that I really like, but I think the one that I like the most is Zilfin because of the pure love of sailing. Like, they're the finest sailors. They're the most efficient at riding the winds. And when I, early on when I was trying to create this elven version, of the KO and, talking to Davy about which one would work. And we always think of elves as being really fast, but I also like just that idea that, if you have to skirt some wind, right? You think of when you go down a river, there's buoys, there's a green and a red, and you stay between them. And, you stay in the deepest part of the water, and it's the easiest to sail and it's the safest. That these guys are the ones who could probably get the closest to that edge of that wind or that spot. And they just know how to ride it to get back in or whatever. So they're going to maybe take the more risks in the sailing itself. They're going to go into the harshest places, the most turbulent winds, and still be able to come back out of it. So that gives them that edge and getting someplace faster, further. And so the exploration of it is really what intrigues me about them. What else to know about them? After the Necroquake, they had the kind of the best sailing ability to ride through it and save more of their ships. And so which means that now that the exploration's back on, they're kind of able to kind of respond to that a little bit quicker.
They gained a seat. They're up to 5 from 4.
And then,
I like the scorekeeping. Thank you. Keep it up.
I think they have one of the coolest pictures in the book because the picture of their city, the one that's attached to their text, has one of these huge gargantuan ships we don't have models of. In very front and center, and then what looks to be maybe a harvester from the ether gold mining as well, kind of coming into the picture from the bottom right. And it has this wonderful picture of the sky lanes crossing over the port itself, which is super cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's in passing references that they're like the biggest boat we see on the table is an ironclad, but there's much larger out there. They're just not as efficient, and so they're not as often used for war.
Yep. So that's that. I think just for that pure like the excellence in captaining ships and sailing ships.
They're very obviously they're very boaty, these guys. And harkening back to another Tomb King Christian question he had for us, he wanted to know if you guys had a boat, what would you call it?
Davy, did you name your boat?
I did. It was the Swift Lady, I think, or the Swift Rin. Rin is the duardin term for lady. So.
Nerd.
I got this. I only have a frigate built right now for my Kharadron, and it's called the Aether Dance. Very swift but the ironclad that I'm going to build is called the Mathlon's Reach. Kind of how far can Mathlon's hand get is where their ship is.
Sure. Paul, what would you name your boat, or what did you name your boat?
Skitter Sailor.
Ooh, Skitter Sailor. And my boat is Yeah Boy.
I'm on
On a boat.
All right, Paul. What was your skyport?
Urbaz. I really like it. They are the traders extraordinaire, and they are known as the Market City. They just have a ton of this mercantile aspect to their city that I really appreciate. They are the ones who have the story of abandoning a whole bunch of people in the middle of chaos-infested waste because they ran out of money. So, we're not going to keep carrying them. The other thing that really is fun to me is they boast the greatest sky fishing fleets. And it says its code writes, long ago won code claims for several cloud banks rich in life. So that seems really fun. The idea of having this subsistence fishing within the clouds themselves. And we haven't delved into that as much. But again, it's one of those everyday life. Where do they get food from? Where do they, are they able to subsist?
Yeah.
So
This was the other one I was kind of waving between because my Kharadron hunt these giant sky sails and they talk a lot about these. The megalodons, the sky sharks and stuff like that. Like there's just so much of this air life, and that's really cool. These guys also push the boundaries quite a bit, like Mornar. They try and they go a little bit more risky with their aether chemistry. They're the one trying to get that squeeze the juice, every last bit of power out of that. Yeah. So it's kind of.
And they have a super cool in-game mechanic. I know we usually don't talk about that, but their port allows them to use ether gold shares without having a penalty, which is a cool just expression of the background.
They're so dang rich.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I enjoyed that quite a lot.
How many seats on the whatever do they have?
They actually lost some. I think they're down to 1.
Oh, bummer.
Yep.
All right, my favorite skyport is one that they call Barrack. I can't say this word. Thring.
Got it.
You said it.
That rings true.
That's my jam. They are the traditionalists. I'm hesitant to use the word like conservative with modern day connotations, but to some degree, yeah. And that they harken back to a simpler reading of the code, or maybe a more literal reading of the code. When we talk about like the Kharadron Overlords kind of being like godless, you wouldn't necessarily call these folks godless. They don't maybe necessarily worship like their previous ancestor gods, but they do acknowledge them and maybe respect them to some degree. And so they don't want to forget some of that. They have maybe closer ties to some of the previous incarnations of the duardin. They have maybe a closer tie to like the Fire Slayers or the Dispossessed. And they're just not as interested in the newfangled technology that all the darn kids are using these days. They respect and so hold dear sort of the older methods, which is crazy because like it's still like sky ships flying in the sky, but they like them rickety and a little bit more ancient,
sturdier.
Yeah, so
tested,
reliable.
I like these guys because I don't know, maybe it rubs me a little bit the wrong way how quickly the Kharadron were able to sort of abandon their previous lifestyles and like sort of take to the skies and sort of leave everyone behind. And these folks are maybe the closest to at least having some connection or remembrance to from where they came from. They they remember where they came up.
Aaron, we're not going to quit the podcast. We'll keep coming over and recording with you. We're not leaving
I am
you.
projecting a little bit. But some of the cool things about them, I think we did talk about, but their like refining mechanisms for aether gold like isn't nearly as polluting as some of the newer processes because they're a little bit more, I don't know what you, analog, I guess. They're not as sort of steeped in some of the new technologies that kick out that much more pollution, but they have like their own, like their billows are still like manually used, and because of that, their skies are cleaner. I think we talked about they take a very literal interpretation of the code, and they don't like folks taking advantage of it.
I think it's interesting that they're more open to the other duardin, especially fire slayers, because they don't come from the same ancestry necessarily.
stock,
Like you have to reach further back to create that tie. So in some regards, I feel like there's an openness there that you don't get with the other ones. That kind of balances out that stodginess or the fear of progression.
Well, and they have connection to some of the other duardin ancestor gods, harkening back to even what we know is even before. And maybe I'm reading too much into this. I just saw some statues in the pictures of the
about
Battletome.
those, you talk about them revering the ancestors. They have some enormous statues in their skyport. And Paul, I was wondering. So they've got Grungni is up at the top.
Yep.
Then you can see Grimnir.
Yep.
Well, Grimnir's not the next one. He's two down, and then Valaya, who was consumed in the end times. There's another god there, and I don't recognize. I'm wondering if it's there's the Duardin god of death, and I cannot think of what
from
his
like
name
the dusty dwarfs from like the Josh Reynolds stories, like more recently, Age of Sigmar. Yeah.
That was my best guess. I went looking around to try and find a rune for him because it's like a triangle with lines coming off it, but I could not. Gazul. Was so. That was my best guess. I know I read something that his rune is supposed to look like a stylized cave. Maybe that's what it is. If there's a listener out there who knows, let us know. That would be awesome. I'd love to know who that other. I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure it out and couldn't do it.
That's fair.
People died.
Sure. My kids didn't get lunch today because I was trying to.
So with the two we didn't touch on, Barrack-Nar, they're basically the capital city, and Barrack-Zon was the first founded, as it were. It's known for its military might, whereas Barrack-Nar is the capital where the Geldrad meets, and it has the most
steering hand.
Yeah, steering hand.
Great
on the
term
council.
for that.
Yeah.
10 and 1. 10 and 2, I mean.
Is there any notable special characters that come from Barrack-Nar?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So we have Brock Grungson, who is the richest of the Kharadron Overlords. He is the most successful, and he holds the most shares of ether gold at the moment.
He's Lord Magnate, which is as high as you can get without actually having a seat on the Geldrad.
Correct. And
Why doesn't he have a seat?
Just still up and coming.
he is a Lord Magnate. So as you said, he is the most power without being on the Geldrad. But in addition to Brock Grungson, we also have a couple more named characters that are from Barrack-Nar. And we have Bjorgen Thundrik from the Underworld's Warband, and then Thundrik's Profiteers. So this is a cool kind of twist on just adding in an Underworld's Warband to a Battletome, because they are named characters specific to Barrack-Nar. So that's a cool way of theming your army, is getting the Underworld's Warband and getting Brock himself.
Sure.
But we don't have any other characters named for any other port. So that's the...
Well, even in the book at all, even if they don't have a model, were there any like characters in this Battletome that grabbed you guys?
They specifically have there's a female Barrack Mornar, but she's a captain. She's not
a captain. Okay, gotcha.
it's in that call out page, but her picture just happens to be the one I think is coolest. And she's got this face tattoo. Yeah, I don't know. I was like, yeah, all right.
Neat,
yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. And the reason I'm pushing this subject is because listener Pavement from the Dogs of Warcraft podcast wanted to know if there are any other cool characters in the book besides Brock Grungson.
Yeah, and the Grunstock Company is a huge push in this book. They're basically the Navy SEALs of the Kharadron Overlords, or the Special Forces, for those who don't get the reference. They are pretty much always described as being the last ones on the ground defending as everyone else tries to get away. And they are armed with the most different weapons. so everyone can be equipped with a different weapon as far as the models are concerned. And their boats are literally just escorts. They are there to zip around and take care of protecting the larger ships or to scout ahead.
Or be gunships, you
Yeah.
know, like heavily armed, speedy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like, I mean, I know that there's gyrocopters and gyro bombers, but I think it was like the attack helicopter, or the
The Apache.
the A-10 or something like that.
Sure. Harkening back to the different skyports, another listener question. Tristan also wanted to know what barrack felt the most lived in. Does anybody want to advocate for your favorite barrack as the most lived in, or maybe like identifiable?
If there's a spoiler, Barrack Nar, if I'm not mistaken, is represented in one of the short stories from Black Library. And so that to me feels the most lived in at the moment, having read that background.
Cool.
I think the Overlords of the Iron Dragon, I think there's Zilfin, but it doesn't tell you a lot in that one about it. It might be in the sequel.
Yeah.
I would say just reading in the background, I think Paul's pick of Urbaz, like it had what felt to be sort of the most like, this is how the Skyport works or something like that. I mean,
seems very quintessential to the.
Sure.
The other interesting thing about this book is that
We'll be the judge of that.
you're allowed to make your own Skyport as far as the rules are concerned.
I don't need permission from them.
But there are a ton of lesser Skyports that are like name dropped. Like one of them is completely destroyed but manned by the ghosts of angry duardin. There are several that were just destroyed in the Garaktomen, and there are other ones that are lost. Like there's a whole history that is created behind what's going on at these 6 major Skyports. And it's really fascinating because they talk about how the charter companies are in some of these other lesser ones, and the Grundstock might be in some of these other lesser ones. And they really allow you to have kind of a mental exploration of what's possible with the Kharadron.
Very cool. Very neat. So that wraps up a lot of what's like in the book. Did you guys have any other points or interesting things or stuff that you thought was cool in this Battletome?
Well, I would say, and again, like Paul said, we don't spend much time on the rules, but me looking at them, we talk about this term verisimilitude, and it feels like that exists a lot more. The boats feel like boats. You can, if you're on the boat, you can fire out of them, which you can imagine them standing on the decks and unloading guns, and they can fly high. There's all these things that like, and I can't really speak to balance on the table or anything like that, but the important part for me, if I'm playing to tell a story with it, is that it plays like it looks like it should, right? And before they just kind of felt like, they were slow enough that it was hard to fly over the top of anything, and so you just kind of like, you felt like a tank more than you felt like a boat a lot of times. And so this was that was something that I like, and that's a storytelling element, because if you're putting the models on the table, you want to be able to do that sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then just a real fun place to browse is the command traits and artifacts, because it's a nice, you just get these little bite-sized snippets of here's something, and they're specific to to the Endrin Masters and the Navigators and the Admirals all have their own things. And so it's fun where you can just kind of learn more about that character type just by reading the things available to them, the upgrades available to them. So I would not, if you're into the story, I would not overlook that portion to learn some more.
I did not read those, but now I'll go back and do so.
Yeah. One of the obviously kind of fun artifacts that you probably heard about, but they can take a spell in the bottle where they have captured, an endless spell, and they can just cast it. They can break that bottle open and cast it on the battlefield. And
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like it's a cool, I mean, whatever rules effect it has, but like the idea that they're approaching magic as, let's take a scientific mind to this. We'll capture it in a bottle. Like that. I like that specifically further informs or further reinforces some of the things you already know about this faction from elsewhere in the book.
Yep.
Well, and we didn't talk about it, but harking it back to the ramifications of the Necroquake, that's another thing that sort of poses a threat to these KO, is that it's not just other airborne like sentient beings that they need to fight off, which I mean, there's not a lot, but there are some. But the fact that like random endless spells like could be reaching them up in the sky, and that is sort of a force of nature that they have to now contend with, in addition to, you know, the beasts and the other like residents of the skies. So like it's they have to come up with ways to battle this magical forces out there.
I really enjoyed getting a second look at this army. I know that the first book was larger, but this one seemed to fill my mind more completely with what the race is about.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that.
I think one thing reaching outside of the book, in the Cities of Sigmar book, in Tempest Eye City, there's a lot of Kharadron that can ally into that army, which means that there are some successful kind of trade partners and maybe even Kharadron units or boats or captains or whatever that have gone outside and kind of joined with Sigmar's armies and become allies in closer ways. So that's pretty cool. You know, again, that exchange of technology and information may be more fluid in the future.
Sure. All right. So if there's no other thoughts, there one more or maybe two more questions that came from our listener. There's Thundercake in the Discord. He wanted to know what a baby KO looked like, which I don't know that we know. But I will say that there are a couple references to children, from like a training perspective, and that they need to like work to get into these different like schooling systems to join their guilds. But actually, in our most recent Pocket Realms episode, there is reference to I'm not going to say married couple, partnership, life partner, talking about their children. And so, like, the way it's phrased in that story sort of calls out that, you know, children are important to these folks. Like, I don't know that there's a price on your kids per se when we say there's a price on everything. But I got the sense that they were important, and family still was important to these to this race.
We actually get a view of what a Kharadron baby bonnet or bassinet looks like. If you watch The Mandalorian,
I knew this is coming.
Yeah. And baby Yoda is floating in one of those. So that little floating ball.
Fair enough. But then Thundercake also asked about any lore snippets in the book that would sort of generate any army ideas. I'm going to twist that question a little bit, and instead, real quick, if you guys would talk about just real fast your guys' armies, because 3 of you have Kharadron Overlord armies, and maybe you could take a bit to describe what you have.
Yeah, I have the most traditional one. I have done a couple conversions in there, but mostly stock. I'm pretty proud of my Admiral. I used the Brock head with the mustache blasters,
nice.
Which I've been working on, like getting this mustache big enough to get the blasters. You came in,
and I was nervous. Yeah.
But
what's the stash?
They're the Shadow's Edge Privateers, is what I called them, and they're led by Floki Frosthull, so named for hiding his fleet up in ice clouds for longer than his unsuspecting victims thought was possible. And so they presumed it was safe, and then he comes out all frozen over, but succeeds in the ambush. So that's cool. How he earned his battle name. I got about 1,000 points of that painted up, and excited to do some more. So.
Neat.
Nice.
Eric, tell us about
So the Kharadron Overlords came out of a comparison of the KO AOS model line and the 40K Drukhari or Dark Eldar model line, which has a lot of ships that have a similar size and that sort of thing. And so the idea of elves and how do elves do sky differently. And so they've got sleeker ships, shallower ships, and they do more skating around. And the lore there is that they certainly the Admiral what's his name? Ador Sailfin Onspear is a former Corsair, probably worked with KO at some point, learned Endrin works, modified them in the Elven way, and they hunt down large sky sails, which are large sail fin fish, and the way that they fly is that their sail fins convert aether gold into kinetic energy, and so they instead of big balloons, they have that material that they use for fins and sails and that sort of stuff. And so a little bit like Treasure Island from DreamWorks or whatever, where it's kind of a conversion process or a osmosis process or something. Anyway, I don't need to explain it. It's fantasy. And so that's how they sail through the air. So it's less of a storage and maybe a little more restricted to where the currents are, etc. So, try to find different ways to convert and pull. I have a pretty strict, like, I need it to be WYSIWYG. I need it to kind of make sense with whatever rules I've created for the army, but it doesn't always make sense to everyone else. But anyway, that's my Drukhari drawn.
Very cool. Paul, tell us about your...
I built an army of Grotbag Scuttlers. So the lore is that a Lord Magnate really wanted to get some ether gold that was in Ideneth hold. It was basically the Ether Sea is permanent in this part of the desert. And because it was so thick, his engines couldn't push through fast enough without running out of gold. So he put legs on his ships in order to be able to go in and start harvesting that gold. Unfortunately, the Ideneth came out and destroyed them. And so these ships are just stranded in this patch of Ether Sea. And a madcap shaman managed to find them and now goes around depopulating the goblin tribes from all the surrounding area and convinces them that this fleet will make them the best, goodest army ever. And so they go out and try and raid something, fail miserably, and then he just goes out and gets another tribe to repopulate them as sky pirates. So
nice.
It's a quintessential Paul.
yeah, exactly. Homicidal
Always
general.
just no care whatsoever.
Yeah.
and I don't have a Kharadron Overlord army, but if I did, it would be a Barrack Thring force, but they would be sort of like evangelists for like Grungni, trying to bring the rest of the Kharadron Overlords back to the fold, and so there's sort of proselytizing.
Let's go back to the mountains.
Yeah, well, and try to rekindle the worship for Grungni, maybe to sort of bring him back or catch his attention again. Not that he's gone permanently, but that's what I would do without a single conversion. Stock all the way.
Paint on the box.
Yeah. I think there are some conversion ideas. The Skyport that was lost with the angry duardin spirits. I'm sure you could make a spirit sky pirate army.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be too hard. You could do an army of the city folk, right? Say that the Arkanauts were destroyed, and you have these city folk that are forced to man the ships. That could easily be a cool conversion that you could make as well.
Yeah, true. So there are all sorts of ideas, I think, in this book to be discovered. Kind of went out of order because I did reference that Beneath the Rust short story, but were there any other Black Library books we want to recommend for fans of the Kharadron Overlord race faction?
There's the 1-2 from C.L. Werner, which is the Overlords of the Iron Dragon and Prophet's Ruin.
1, 2, 3 actually, because Shipwrats is those same characters as
is
well.
That a prequel to?
I think prequel, but I think it's independent of the storyline. Well, that's not true because something happens at the end. Well, whatever. I'm not sure. But then there's also the Beneath the Rust, which is the prequel to Code of the Skies by Graham Lyon as well. But if you want to hear our review of Beneath the Rust, that short story, then please listen to, I don't know whether it's the most recent Pocket Realms or the one that's coming out next. Who's to say how timing works? It's crazy in the Moral Realms.
But if you read Beneath the Rust, you should read Code of the Skies.
Ooh.
I loved it. It was easily my favorite Kharadron story that we've had so far.
Glowing recommendation.
Strong recommendation.
Yeah.
All right. We're at the end. Any other thoughts before we get to our review? Nice. Paul, give me a review of the Battletome. What'd you think?
I would go 7 out of 8 spider legs.
Ooh.
I really enjoyed it. It gave me a full sense of the Kharadron that I don't feel like that I had before. And I really appreciated the way that they fleshed out the actual cities.
I will go 16 out of 18 seats on the Geldrad.
I'm racking my brain right now.
I really liked it a lot. It's a faction I loved when it came out and was a little disappointed with how it looked or how it implemented on the tabletop. But I think I'm glad to see him again. I like it. Feels that more fleshed out, more to sink your teeth into, and really enjoyed reading it. I was glad we picked this.
Eric.
Oh man, 3 out of 5 gun haulers. There were a few new things, and I always love. I mean, my favorite part is kind of the piece where they kind of give you tidbits, the timeline. They give you some stories, or it could be they did give us Some new details that we didn't have before in terms of Grungni setting up kind of the center of Shaman for them. There was a few places as I was reading too that I felt like I was reading the same paragraph over and over, like something that they told us before they just told it to us in only slightly new way. So it felt like some wasted space in what we talked about, kind of like an already thin battle tome. So I think there could have been more room to talk through the different skyports and life on there or whatever. But
that's, yeah. Well, and another point is that in some of the other battle tomes we've recently seen, there's a lot of those fiction blurbs in there. Mm-hmm. I think there was one in this one, like a in character fiction blurb where you have dialogue and such.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah,
Cities of Sigmar, they had one for each of the cities that they covered. So here wouldn't have been cool if we had a blurb like that for every skyport.
Yeah, and there's a little bit. I don't know if there's more cool art in this one than there was before, but yeah. So I mean, I felt like often I'm expecting to burst on every page with something new, and there's a couple pages where I was kind of like just thought I was reading the same thing.
Sure. All right, everyone else give it a number. I will give it a 4.5 out of 6 major skyports. I like when the battle tomes hint towards like future events and then just sort of give you that teaser for what's to come. This story didn't really necessarily, or maybe you had to read between the lines and sort of create where you thought it was going to go, as opposed to like maybe an explicit like breadcrumb trail into the next thing. However, I did like that it did spend a lot of time firmly planting this battle tome sort of in the present day, like post Necroquake, and sort of dealing with the ramifications of that. And because of that, maybe that's the next best thing. If I can't look forward for it, at the very least, I want the battle tome to live in the now and relate to things that I know have already occurred. Because without that, it feels like it's just sort of a nebulous, fish out of water type story. So, the fact that they went ahead and started re-releasing a lot of these battle tomes that maybe existed in AOS 1.0, it would have been a wasted opportunity to not talk about the now for each of these new battle tomes. And I think some of the ones we've talked about in our shows, like the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, are obviously, post Necroquake and again, a present day type army. So, I'm glad that they spent a fair bit of time dealing with that fallout and that ramifications, and that it changed the army in some way, or it maybe changed the effect of how they lived, and it shook things up. It wasn't sort of an inconsequential, even, them being up in the air and the Necroquake maybe is quake right down on the ground. It still had far-reaching effects, even to the skies of the mortal realms. So I thought that was important. Honestly, I hate to say this to you guys because you all have the army. The army in itself, I have no interest really in playing. I don't necessarily need that sort of tech.
Get him, boys.
I know, right?
Rude.
Yeah. Should I leave my own house?
Yeah.
Should I go?
That'd be the code.
Leave your stuff, though.
Code demands it.
But this won me over a little in sort of seeing more of the less tech side and what little information I could get about how they lived beyond sort of just the technology. I could have done for a little bit more on sort of I'm going to say the human aspect, but in this case, the duardin aspect.
There we go. He's learning.
Yeah, I'm doing what I can. But I'll take what I can get, and maybe that's the job of the Black Library fiction, and not the job of the battle tome, quite possibly. So I recommend picking it up if you're interested, dear listener, in the Kharadron Overlords. Any other thoughts before we close it out?
Yeah, I think it's nice that we've come around. We've revisited these guys. We've got a couple more battle tomes to revisit, and then it's open skies. It's time for our reforging, but Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on our Discord channel. Drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar further than we can do it on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter @TheMortalRealms. Davey, where can they find you?
I'm at red_Zeke.
Aaron?
I'm at Dos Asos.
Paul?
At PJ Shard.
And this is Eric at Stonemunk Gamer. And you can find all of our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. Anybody else know? You guys literally play the army. Does anybody else have a concept? What do you do around here? All right, so 2017, I think, is probably when they...
Yeah, guess who's waiting behind the rift?
Was it you?
Is it Kaiju?
No. Zinch.
Oh, God, that was my next
Whoa,
guess. That's what I should have done. Dang it, I'm embarrassed now.
Would that make the world skyfarer if there's only one boat?
Interesting. Well, it's not Skyfarer that they're different sizes now, is it?
Oh my God! Somebody get us out of this.
I'm trying. Pull up.
It's time for our reforging.